All right, everyone. Welcome back to the pod. My name's Arvind Chari. I'm the VP of Operations at Phyto Ag, which is a company that's working to recycle cow manure and turn it back into useful protein. Formerly an indoor farmer and also worked in solar energy. And I got with me my co-host here, Vivek Ramani. He's the man who knows how to pick them. Key sales employee at Box, Stripe, Notion, Blackbird, all looking like absolute great choices. So we're hoping he's picked the right podcast here too to co-host. And we're diving right in today with Saumil Shah. He's our good friend, a slightly better golfer than us, just slightly. And he's also the chief of staff to the CEO of ARM. Estimates suggest that 70% of the world uses ARM day to day. They design the brains in almost every smart device people own. That means that the circuitry needed to process input, store data, and output results in all of your devices really go through an ARM design chip in most cases. In 2020, NVIDIA tried to acquire ARM for $40 billion, but it was blocked by the FTC. They thought the acquisition would harm competition, and at the time, maybe it was slightly disappointing, but it looks like it's better for it. ARM right now is public, trading at $140 billion valuation, and 3.5x their valuation at the time of that acquisition proposal. So Saumil, welcome to the pod. We want to dive right in with you, but I want to actually note one last thing, which is, Saumil, when you were going to join ARM, I remember you calling me on the phone and telling me you were joining. And I was standing outside of Twin Creeks, this solar company. And I looked over and you're like, I'm joining this company, ARM. It's like, what is this company? And I was like, wait, there's a building right here. I got the ARM name on it. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to be working right there. This is back in 2012. So I realized on the phone, you're working at ARM. I had never really looked at that building. It was like, ARM, what do they do? What's going on? I didn't know anything about it. So that was our serendipitous, your move back to the Bay, and everything started from there. But yeah, Saumil, welcome to the pod.
I mean, that was just amazing, right? Literally across the street, the only building ARM had, the one you were working in, and of all everywhere in the Bay. I didn't even know where the office was until you told me that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah. Well, just to give a little context, at that time, Saumil was working in San Diego, so he wasn't in the Bay. We went to school together at Berkeley, and then he moved to San Diego. Right? And at that time you were in Qualcomm, right?
I was, yeah. So I did two years at Qualcomm. I was doing this, I'll go back and a little to it, but I was doing this procurement role where I was negotiating with ARM to sort of procure ARM licenses into Qualcomm. And did that for a couple of years. And then out of one of the negotiations, a few folks at ARM asked if I'd be interested in a job, basically switching the other side of the table. And I thought, of course, San Diego was great. Was living in La Jolla, working at Qualcomm. What's not to like? I thought, small British company called ARM. Let's do 2 years back in the Bay. All my friends are in the Bay, and then we'll go back. That was 12 and a half years ago. So still here.
We want to dive into that a little bit with you because I think in our, I don't know, somewhat in our generation, it's been uncommon to see people stick around at the same job for like so long. So it's a really cool thing that we could talk about, and maybe it's just like learn about your mentality around it. So
I would say
let's talk about it.
Yeah, I would say one of the reasons, I would say there's probably two reasons that I've stayed at the company for so long. One of them probably being just my nature is a little bit more cautious, right? And so I've been probably less hesitant to go jump off of a relatively stable ship to a certain degree. And so that's probably what kept me from going and trying a bunch of different companies or trying a bunch of different jobs outside. But at the same time, I haven't necessarily done the same job at ARM for more than, say, 2 years at a time. So every 2 years, I've either been in the same role, the same group, but have more responsibility or change roles and so forth. Just for context, when I joined ARM, it was publicly listed on NASDAQ and the FTSE 100, which is the London Stock Exchange. It was about 2,200 people. And then 4 years later, we were about, let's say, 4,000 people and were acquired by SoftBank, the Japanese conglomerate. So we became fully private, invested a bunch, grew different businesses. And then Arv, as you said, we got SoftBank then tried to sell us in 2020 to NVIDIA, went through a whole regulatory element there. that tipped over. Then we decided to go public, went through that, went public, and now we're about 8,000 people. And so not only has it been different jobs, but the company has changed sort of dramatically over the time I've been there. I would say it was a small kind of British company where you knew most of the people. To we got large, we got corporate, probably too large, probably too corporate, scaled that back and up and down. So it's been really entertaining to see all that, and at the same time, the institutional knowledge that you gain from being there, going through that, matched with the new experiences, has kind of been a perfect blend for me, right? Because I have the sort of comfort of knowing the space, knowing the region, knowing the who's who, a little bit of where the dead bodies are, but also the excitement of everything we're working on. So that's kind of how I would say why I've been here for so long, and coming up on 13 years soon.
Before we dive too much further into your positions in the company or anything, can you actually tell us a little about what ARM does? I feel like a lot of people look at ARM and they're like, it's very under the radar. And maybe you can compare it to some of the players that people know about.
Yeah, so when I joined the company, it was incredibly unknown. Like, I was in the semiconductor industry, I didn't know what it was, right? I didn't know what it did. And so at the heart of it, ARM designs CPUs, central processing units. A CPU is the heart of a chip, and a chip goes into everything we know and do today, right? Because everything is now a digital device. So the beauty of ARM is we actually don't manufacture anything. We don't produce anything physical. We design the processor and then we license it to companies. So we essentially have a wide set of customers who make chips based on ARM technology and then go ship them. They pay us a upfront fee to actually go and license that technology. And then every time they ship a chip based off of the technology of ours they're using, we get a royalty off of it. So the financial community loves it because it's a fantastic profit margin business. I mean, I think our gross margins in like the 98% or something like that. And also it enables this massive breadth because we can basically work with every chip vendor in the world, and our technology goes into that. And so when I joined ARM, it had just started to gain traction because smartphones were a thing. And I'll back up even more. There's what is a CPU? It's basically a computer architecture, and the sort of dominant computer architecture of the 90s and 2000s is something called x86, which is what Intel and AMD do. And it's a sort of closed system where they are the only two companies that make x86 chips. So if you're making a computer, or if you're making a supercomputer, if you're making anything that's digital, you go and buy chips from them. So ARM came up as this sort of alternative, and the notion of ARM was it was meant to be low powered. So actually, ARM's original story is it was meant to take what were ceramic chips at the time, and to make them cheaper, put them in a plastic packaging. And to put them in plastic packaging, you needed them to be lower power so the heat didn't melt the plastic. And so the initial intention of ARM was to be this low power design. And the story of actually the first design that was ever done at ARM is they designed it, got a chip made out of it, and then booted it up, and it worked. And then everyone went home, and they came back the next day, and apparently the chip was still running, and they were like, how is this still running? And they realized it actually wasn't running off of the power that was plugged in. It was running off of the leakage of the voltage that was happening on the device.
Wow.
So it was sort of oh crap, we have something that is low power. And so essentially when phones became a thing, and it's just smartphones, you couldn't plug this thing into something, right? So you needed it to be low power, and it had to run all day and so forth. So in 2012, when I started, ARM had just become sort of quite pervasive in smartphones. When Apple made their first iPhone, everything Apple was doing up to then was based off of Intel. They made quite a strategic decision to actually base the iPhone off of ARM and ARM architecture, which obviously was great for us. Android ended up doing the same, Android manufacturers. And so we were sort of the dominant and are the dominant player in smartphones. Fast forward, as everything else becomes digital And our big systems, we need to start saving power. Then things like the cloud data centers start to use ARM. AWS Graviton was one of our first things there. Automotive, like as cars or electric vehicles, they're basically computers on wheels. And what matters to that? Range, battery life. So you need something that's not basically a server in the trunk of your car. You need something that's going to run too much. You don't want the computer draining the battery. You want the range draining the battery. And then same with everything else, sort of that they put in the IoT category, everything that's smart, from fridges to washing machines to toasters to whatnot. So we kind of, we use this talking point of, when you wake up and you interact with everything in your home, you're probably touching 100, 150, 200 ARM CPUs just in your day, right? Like I've got a monitor in front of me, I've got a laptop, a phone.
Quick follow-up, or maybe it sounds like the power savings is like one of the big things that ARM innovated. But how did they decide not to vertically integrate if, like, all the other players were kind of designing and building their chip in their superpower way? Why did ARM decide we have the superpower, which is power savings? Why don't we go build it out?
We weren't big enough at the time. It was a
company decision.
Yeah. So if I take a phone down or anything down to the chip level, you have a chip, and we have a processor that we design as part of it. That processor then goes into a chip that's designed by a semiconductor company, the likes of Samsung, Texas Instruments, Qualcomm, etc. And then that chip is then actually manufactured at what they call a foundry. It's just basically a fab foundry. And today, those are the biggest and most advanced ones are in Taiwan, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. That process is massively expensive, but it's not necessarily where you innovate on it. So when ARM started growing, this notion of a fabless semiconductor company came to fruition. So before, everyone used to do your CPU design, your chip design, your manufacturing all the way through. And then as the sort of cost of manufacturing, increased so much, those started getting condensed, and these companies that were sort of fabless would design it and then go get it manufactured came up. So the opportunity to verticalize was necessarily not there. And it wasn't also sort of financially motivating to do it at the time.
Yeah, maybe another follow-up to that is you're 13 years in, ARM's been around even longer. What's allowed you all to keep a competitive moat around your technology?
Software. So basically, hardware is nothing without the software, right? If these things in front of us don't run software, they're bricks. They're just big rocks. So what drives everything is the operating system or the applications on top of it. So ARM's moat, especially in let's start with the smartphones. When Apple designed their phone using ARM in it, they wrote iOS on ARM. iOS applications are written on ARM. Android is written on ARM. And to do that requires a lot of work. So, smartphones, obviously, they came up, and applications were written for iOS and Android as they were set standards. The example I'll give is if you look at the PC space. So MacBooks were based on Intel up until 2019. In 2019, Apple decided to switch MacBooks to a ARM-based architecture. So to do that, they wrote macOS for the new computer architecture, and then they actually had to have all the applications that run on your laptop ported to ARM. So you can either get them ported, and each individual application takes work to do that, or you can use an emulator to do that. An emulator slows down everything, right? Because it's not running natively on it. So as Apple did that, they basically had an emulator, and then they had apps to start getting ported. So enterprise apps didn't actually run on those MacBooks in about 2019, 2020, well, for a while.
Yeah, and if you were a recent switch over to Apple Silicon, like what they call it,
yeah.
You'll vividly remember that, like, your Wi-Fi wouldn't work, or random things that you'd expect to work wouldn't work because a lot of the application layer things weren't speaking to the chips in the right way, I'm guessing.
Exactly. And so the PC ecosystem is even more complex because at least with Apple, it's everything there, right? From silicon to hardware to operating system, even certain apps. In the PC world, you've got multiple silicon, you have multiple hardware vendors, you have Windows, and then you got a lot of apps. So ARM actually introduced ARM and Microsoft introduced silicon and Windows on ARM back in 2013. It is only starting to get traction this year now because finally, after a decade, all the relevant applications that you use have been ported over to run natively on ARM. So if you were to use a ARM-based PC, I used one 3 years ago, experience wasn't that great, right? Excel would lag a bit, PowerPoint would lag a bit, this and that. Only recently have all these applications finally been ported natively to work on ARM, so that the experience if you buy a ARM-based, Windows-based PC today is finally better. So to answer your question, that took nearly a decade. So if somebody was to try and move off of ARM to a different computer architecture today, you would have to invest a lot to port all the software. So that's why kind of software is our moat.
Yeah.
And it's a cyclical cycle because the more ARM hardware that goes out there, the more software gets written on ARM, the more the moat becomes larger and larger. And we have,
there's a network effect.
There's network, and we have 30 billion chips manufactured on ARM a year. Like 30 billion. That's a lot of devices out there that are running a ton of ARM.
And another follow-up question to that is, so NVIDIA has, they build GPUs. They have their own programming language that developers use called CUDA.
Yep.
Be able to write to their hardware. I'm guessing. I might be saying all this wrong. Like I'm a sales guy.
No, spot on.
But do you guys have something like that where you have your own kind of language that people have to use to write to your architecture, or how does it work?
No. So what NVIDIA did with CUDA, and CUDA's been around since early 2000s. And at that time, NVIDIA was basically doing graphics chips for laptops, right, and desktops for gaming purposes. And CUDA was meant as a way to take advantage of the functionality that was written and designed within the GPUs. And then over the last decade or so, as people discovered that GPUs are actually really good for accelerated computing, because in simplest terms, what a CPU does is it processes instructions one by one. So it goes A to B to C to D to D in order like that. What GPUs do is they do parallel processing. You can do like 5 instructions altogether at 10 instructions altogether at one time. So it's much more powerful, but also a lot more power hungry. So it's not an efficient way necessarily if you're running a low level task, but when you need like high end gaming, which is a ton of pixels that are coming to the screen, you need that type of parallel processing. So CUDA became kind of that interface. So especially when AI became large language models, then to be able to write your models on the GPU, CUDA is a great interface layer to do that. So ARM, we don't have an interface layer like that because we don't need one at the moment. But in this kind of in the world where things are going, where it might not actually be the operating system that matters, it might not be actually the applications that matter. It might simply be the model that matters. That's an interesting world, right? Where you might need a different type of software interface layer.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of leading into this a little, but I'm curious. It seems like super important to hook in at the beginning of a technology life cycle, like smartphones, to get into the ecosystem up front and then be in that ecosystem for a long time. Like, from what you can publicly say, what's coming next? What's the next big hook? Is it the AI revolution? And that's such a broad term. Like, within that, what does that mean? What is the answer?
I would say, it by all accounts, I think it has to be, right? and the reason I say that is because the sheer amount of investment that is happening in that space, it's actually, there's when there's hype cycles that come out, there's a ton of investment that happens, and you wonder when output's going to come out. I'll take the metaverse of whatever 2 years ago that drove all these meta cycles, whereas the actual investments happening in AI now are actually being used for training purposes, and that training is happening, and you are seeing the output of that training lead to some really interesting models. I think what's still TBD is actually then what is the consumer use case for them, right? So how do companies actually make money outside of NVIDIA on AI? So that's kind of probably a big question. But in terms of the next sort of technological wave, it feels like it's got to be that. And it becomes more relevant when, like I said, there's applications that are actually benefiting all of us in our day-to-day lives that are on our devices. Because right now, the whole notion of AI is you have to train these massive models, and you have to train them on, in the cloud, on-prem, on massive data centers, which is, again, where NVIDIA plays. But at some point, to infer off those models, or even train those models on smaller devices like the phone, like the laptop, like a smart speaker or something like that, you need some sort of acceleration on that computing level, but not to the same degree as a massive cloud server, right? So there's this term, it's called like edge to cloud, and you want the models running in the cloud, and you want some of the inference happening locally, because you don't like right now, if you do something in ChatGPT off your phone, it sends it fully to the cloud. If you're using, say, your private data, don't necessarily want that going back to the cloud. If you want it to run quicker latency, you don't necessarily want it to go all the way to the cloud and come back. You would prefer to run it locally. And then the cost of it. The CapEx of these cloud providers right now that they're spending is like billions. It's genuinely insane, the sheer amount of money being put there. So
they're trying to technology companies are trying to buy nuclear reactors. So
yeah, well, it's not only the chips, but like the data center, the power necessary, right? Because the biggest data centers right now are something in like 400 megawatts, and people are looking at gigawatts of electricity, which is absolutely insane. So anyway, all that to say, the opportunity of all these AI engagements, models, interfaces, whatnot, running at the edge and running in devices that normal people have is the opportunity.
So it's sort of like doubling down almost on the mobile device aspect in a way, because those devices are going to be so much more powerful with the AI side. And so,
correct. But I'll throw a loop into that. Is it actually still a mobile device? Sorry, is it still a smartphone as we know today, 5 years from now? Right? Like, I think that could be a question. Like, that because you have this engagement where some of it's running on your phone, some of it's running in the cloud, do these things become dumber to a certain degree because you don't need, that here? Think about it. When we graduated, not all of us had smartphones, right? Smartphones are only around 15 years, 14 years to a certain degree. So think about it in that sense, 5 years from now, these things could look really different.
And I guess on that same vein, how does ARM as a business think about compute in the data center versus compute on a device? Is that all the same to you guys, or is it different in some way, or is there different marketing or different,
It's different. It's different. So, we kind of look at it from a vertical standpoint of, you have your smartphones and PCs, you've got your automotive, your cars and your autonomous there, you've got your IoT devices, and then from the cloud, you basically have, your actual cloud, your networking pieces, things like 5G base stations, and then you have sort of the AI cloud as well, which is a higher end, training needs there. All of these have different performance, power requirements, software requirements, functionality. If you take automotive, for example, anything you do in the automotive space needs to be safety certified, right? There's everything from ASIL B to ASIL D compliant, especially when you get further up the automotive from autonomous from L2 to L3 to L4 to L5. So each of these has different requirements. So we kind of look at them somewhat in isolation, but also with this notion that if the computing architecture below it is consistent, then the software you write for one can easily work for the rest, right? So if you write something that works in the cloud and you've got that same computer architecture that runs on your edge devices, then there's this harmonious, ideal world down the line where your software runs sort of easily across all.
So maybe we can transition a little into your role. And I'm curious if you could define it, what your role is, but also maybe people don't, because your title is chief of staff, but I feel like that has so many different meanings in so many different companies and contexts. Like, what do you do, and what do you think like people think of when they think of chief of staff, and how does your role differ from that?
So I'll back up a bit on this because I feel like the context is kind of entertaining. So the chief of staff title nomenclature obviously comes from politics and got quite popular through the political world, right? You think of like West Wing, you think of Leo McGarry in West Wing, right? Kind of initially.
Exactly. I was going to say
in our days. And then I think probably about the 2012, 2013, 14, 15 timeframe onwards, you started seeing them being applied to the tech world and companies and corporate. So ARM actually started having a chief of staff in, I think, 2016. I remember seeing an email coming in from our CEO going, we're opening this position, and then I think they announced someone for it. And this is a bit of karma. I definitely made fun of the title and the role at the time. I was like, what is this like? What does this person do? Like, what a joke, or what a
it's getting kicked out in Doge, man. That's
yeah. So I definitely I feel like it was karma to actually even end up where I am. But then so I've been a chief of staff. She's coming on 5 years. So I had two predecessors in the role, and then in 2019, our previous CEO was looking for a new chief of staff. I was asked to interview, and at that point, you kind of can't say no to that, right? You kind of have to say it. And so I thought, sure, why not? In the interview, I was asked why I wanted the job. And I always thought I'd get an MBA at some point, right? I did the industrial engineering degree, and then I figured at some point I should do an MBA. So I used a line of, this feels like an MBA at ARM type thing. Definitely very spot on because of the sheer amount of things I've learned since I took it on. And it was supposed to be a 2-year term role at that point. So, it was going to be starting in 2019. By the end of 21, I'd be moving on to something else. I took on that job, and then about 3 months later, we went into COVID, right? So everyone worked from home, changed up the dynamic completely, because this was supposed to be you're attached at the hip to the CEO, and you're traveling everywhere, you're all this. And so now you're suddenly at home. You don't have that sort of dropping into the office or dropping in on a meeting or anything like that. And then a few months later, we went into this due diligence process of potentially trying to be sold. So learn about that. Then we get, this agreement in place for a transaction. Then you learn about regulatory stuff. So went through that. That took on a life of its own. That didn't go through well. And I think all parties decided that they were going to call off the transaction in 2022. My CEO at the time decided, all right, I'm kind of good, retired. Renee, current CEO, who was president at the time, took over. And I talked about this, but he took on, and he was like, remember one of our first conversations, him going, never had a chief of staff, don't really know what you do, like you might be useful in the transition, i.e. like you got a couple weeks and then we're kind of move on. And then I think about a month into that, he basically turned around and went, so you're not going anywhere, right? It's like, actually, I kind of like working for you. And it was let's stay through the IPO, let's stay a little bit after the IPO, and then finally just earlier this year, we kind of decided, actually, this feels more like a long-term role. So I give that context because the role has dramatically changed So when I started, it was a process-oriented role. Like there was the rhythm of the business. The CEO office was structured. We had processes for our board engagement. We had processes for executive staff or executive committee engagement. There were processes for PR elements, for marketing elements, for internal communications, for engineering, KPI, all this stuff. So it was a plug and play type thing. Then when you have sort of a new CEO come on board who wants to do things differently, we got rid of all that. Like the approach we took in 22 was, instead of trying to take things that weren't there today and sort of fit them into a new world, we went, screw it. We're just going to can it all and we're going to restart from scratch. And Renee, my current CEO, was much more of I'm focused on the strategy of the company and the products of the company 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line. So the day-to-day activity, there was quite an opportunity for me to just sort of step up and do more. So to answer your question, it changes on a week-to-week, month-to-month, day-to-day basis. I would say a lot of it is tactical of what are the big rocks in place at the time. And so it covers things from all the way from our board engagement, and then as part of that is also SoftBank, right? SoftBank is a 90% owner of ARM. They have
what's the percentage ownership?
I think it's more like 86, 87 right now.
Okay.
We say 90%.
They own around 90% of the public stock.
Yeah. So SoftBank owned 100, and then they floated 10% of the company into the public markets.
Got it.
So they're a 90% shareholder. So Moss has done fairly well off of his original $32 billion investment. Yeah. So anyway, so there's
the one shining example of all the, essentially like graveyard of companies that SoftBank funded.
So what's funny is, as actually, and I won't say this because I work, I guess, pseudo for him to a certain degree, but I actually think he gets a somewhat of a bad rep, because if obviously very risky, places a ton of bets, but the ones that do hit, do hit.
Yeah.
He has made he has made multiple of his losses on WeWork on his investment in ARM. Just that, right? So I think he probably gets a little unfairly treated. Some of it is probably fair. There's a new book that just came out on him called The Gambling Man that is actually really, really interesting to read, because you, especially for me, right? Like an outside person can read it and go, this is a weird world. Then I read that and I go, I am part of this weird world. Like I see a lot of this stuff. I've seen some of these things that I'm reading about happen live.
Anything
so I realized
spicy you can talk about? Like any quirks, unique things, things that people don't know but are interesting.
Well, one of the things is that he got it's a lot of flack about is he has this very weird slides. So he used, in the quarterly earnings, he would present these slides with very odd images on them. So there's one that it was like this flying horse over a valley of like golden eggs, and it was like how he was traversing over the market downfall, but he had all these golden eggs that were going to hatch at some point, and you're like, yeah, I remember seeing like that actually happening, or like the creation of that happening in the background, and going, this is interesting.
Who generates that image for him?
So he has back to the CEO office. He has his CEO office has, I think, something in the magnitude of 40 plus people in it.
Wow. So he's got like an illustrator or something in there. That's like
they have a huge CEO office. Meanwhile, it was like one of me for the last 5 years, finally too. So anyway, back to your question. What do? A little bit of everything from board engagement. Like I have one-on-ones with board members where they ask if they want a little more information, or if they have questions they want to answer, to engagement across our executive staff. Whatever we're tracking at the EC level, to external comms, right? There's a marketing side, there's a PR side, like a podcast falls into that. There's an internal communication side. There's a engage with everybody else across the company. I mean, part of it is just keeping an ear to the ground, right? Like I'm not the go find stuff and then report it back, but I try and know a little bit of everything that's going on.
You're obviously traveling a ton too. Like you go everywhere with the CEO.
70%.
That's only 70%. Geez.
Yeah. So think about how much I travel, and then multiply that up a bit. That's how much the CEO travels.
But I feel like one of the coolest things, and you kind of said it in the MBA inside ARM, but like you're kind of getting to do an insane amount of learning and of absorption. Like you're in all these insanely high value meetings. You're participating in them. You're like actively doing the deck building and presenting out in them. Like, and then you're tagging onto that like all these cool life events that you get to go to, sit in a box in Wimbledon. You get like
Yes.
it's just like this. I feel like you're living a high octane life right now. Yeah,
Not to mention the second kid on the way.
not too bad. Well,
Yes, that too. The experiences and the perks combined have been like phenomenal. It obviously comes with the sort of commitment to the work, right? Like I think I probably work about 7 days a week, unfortunately, but the output of it has been really really cool. Like if I think about some of the standout experiences, within I would say a year time frame, and since then, of course, went to the White House twice. Went to number 10, obviously the UK's version of the White House, like 3 times. You're seeing all these people, you're experiencing all these things, and then as the perks come up, you take advantage of them. I would say the one that really stood out to me was actually in that vein was the IPO process. Because again, when I joined ARM in 2012, it was a public company. I never thought I'd be like front row seat to an IPO while I was at this company. Yet, lo and behold, the way it worked out, I just ended up being in a position when we were going through it at the time where I got to have a seat at the table and actually an active participation role in figuring out how all that works.
And you were standing there at the bell ringing.
Standing at the bell ringing, yeah. That did the NASDAQ bit. That was pretty cool. Yeah, definitely one of those like bucket list company moments, bucket list corporate moments. Yeah. So no, I mean the experiences have been like everything from like we've had corporate issues in China that have been well documented about a rogue CEO and kind of seeing how all the background of that works. You're watching this and you're going, this feels like a bad straight to DVD corporate espionage movie. Experiences have been through the roof. So it's kind of hard to see like how you go from this to doing something normal.
I was just going to ask, like, what happens? What's the next step as a chief of staff to what?
It's a great question. I genuinely do not have a good answer. I know it's. I think when I all of us have talked about it, when I first came up, it was like have a couple years plan, do this, then do this, then do this. At the rate that not only does the world change, but life changes, right? I think my standing on this is just take it a year at a time. Just look out for opportunities, and the other thing I do is I take advantage of the platform and the exposure, and go and have interesting conversations with interesting people, right? Like I
just
had
like this. This is obviously a highlight of your entire career is just talking to us. Right?
I mean, it's the highlight of the day. It's the highlight of the hour.
I thought you were going to say of the decade.
I mean, the decade's not over yet, so we'll have to see about that.
No, but more seriously, obviously you mentioned earlier, I'm actually surprised by it, which is you're working 7 days a week and you're it sounds like you're probably like on call at any given moment. Your CEO might be in some other part of the world, all that sort of stuff. So, we've had instances where you're running off hole 14 on a golf course to take a call.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that. How do you balance that? How does that impact your life, your relationships, your ability to spend time for yourself, carve out time for yourself? How does all that work?
It's a good question. Like as much as like you said, as much as I do work and I'm on call all the time, I don't necessarily feel like I'm actively missing out on things because I think my mindset is everything's integrated. Like there's no, this is work time, this is home time, this is this time. It all integrates in one. And to be fair, we can do that now because of these things, because of the world of technology that allows us to do that.
Yeah.
The world of hybrid work. I mean, the output of going through a pandemic is we can be at home working this and that. So when I'm traveling, obviously it's dedicated to that. When I'm at home and I've got the time, like, if we get 2 hours out, we'll go play around, like the 45 minutes of tennis, go and do that. I'll still watch every Charger game full out, still make sure like bedtime and bath time are protected and all that. So I kind of just put it all together and make sure it kind of works. And this is one of the reasons of like building out a bigger office within ARM, like having additional people who can take on some of the burden when potentially, I'm unable to. So yeah, it's a just kind of integrate it all in and do it on the fly. I think multitasking at its finest is probably something that is actively required for this, because there's God knows at least 22 windows open right now in front of me, right? That being said, though, it does mean my attention span is extremely limited. Like, if you just gave me one thing to do for a full hour, oh man, I would struggle.
Yeah.
All of our attention spans are in that mode at this point. So.
Yes.
And ARM is partly to blame, folks. So really,
ARM is partly to blame. Yeah, no, we it's funny. Not only are we there as a benefit to society, but we're also a detriment by putting all these technological advances in people's hands.
History will judge.
There's always
history is already judged.
It's a tough argument, because anytime you put something good into the world that's generally good, there's going to be ways that it has negative impacts. There's going to be like outlier issues that come up from it. And although there's a net massive positive coming out of it, it's never going to be 100% positive for anything, right? We can say that about any net positive in the world if you think about it.
There's always bad actors and bad output, but everyone worries about Terminator and AI taking over the world, this and that. 99% of it will be good. 1% of it people will use for bad, but how do you keep that 99% still going?
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, this has been such an excellent conversation. I think we're almost at time here. So glad you could carve out space for us. I know obviously you're so busy, and I know we'd rather be on the golf course right now, but it's raining cats and dogs outside. Thanks so much for being with us.
No, that was fun. I'm pretty sure I've gotten into stuff that I even haven't had a chance to talk to you guys about in the past. So I really like this.
We love doing this, man. We get to actually hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I prefer this to the golf course in that case, because the golf course we don't get into this stuff. So.
We don't, because you guys are over in the rough over there, and I'm 100 yards above in the fairway, so we can't have a conversation while we're doing that.
You're way past the hole, dude. You've overshot it too. That's.
I'm just saying, if you guys just could drive a little further and straighter, maybe
just wait till it gets drier, and we'll be back out there and see what happens.
I'm surprised you aren't lording your tennis over me, but it was opening.
Yeah.
Oh, you give us plenty of openings on the golf course too. So.
All right.
It's fun.
We'll talk to you later.
All right. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.